Hello everyone, I'm Janine Cackmore with PHT, Channel 4, Palos Heights. We're back with our show all about books. And on the show, you know, we talk about books, writing, and authors, and then we have a special guest with us who'll talk about some of the things that they're reading. And of course, today we have with us Lake Catherine's Operations Manager, Gareth Blakesley.
Hello.
He's back on the show. You've been, like, what, the third time already?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. He's a big reader, so we have lots of things to talk about with books. Gareth, you're also here to talk about the Nature and Arts Festival coming up at Lake Catherine.
Right? That's right.
On the show last month, we talked about it with Mike McDonald, and that's coming up on Saturday, April 28th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And it's a collaborative effort between Lake Catherine and the library.
Yeah, we're very excited to partner with you guys.
Yeah, yeah. And it's something we've been working on for quite a while.
Years, I think.
Yeah, it seems like years. No, but so we'll have all the details to come up, so stay tuned. But before we get to visit with Gareth, we're going to talk about books, okay? And we're going to be talking about some of the new release books coming up in April. Now, of course, we can't talk about all the new releases, but we'll touch on some of the ones that are getting a lot of attention and some of the New York Times bestsellers that are coming out. So, to get started, our first book on the list is Verena by Charles Frazier. If that author sounds familiar to you, he wrote the book Cold Mountain several years ago by now. He won the National Book Award for it and was turned into a movie. But in his new book, Verena, Frazier takes us back to the same time period of Cold Mountain, and he brings to life the chaos and the devastation of the Civil War. And he also, in this fourth novel of his, he brings to life a silent historical figure of Verena Howell Davis. She was the wife and widow of Confederate President Jefferson Davis, who at the age of 18 she married. He was at least twice her age at that time and already a widower. She then became the mother of his 6 children, only one of them who made it through the Civil War. And then as the South is collapsing, she flees and as a fugitive with a bounty on her head. And what the author does in this book is he alternates chapters between Verena's story and that of James Blake, who is an orphan black boy growing up on the streets of Richmond, and Verena's family had taken this James Blake in. So this is stories of 2 different people, 2 different views of the events going on at that time. And he writes with his typical style, his very lyrical style of the South, that it was evident in his other books. And he writes that ultimately being on the wrong side of history has its consequences. And we'll have to read the book to find out exactly what those are. So our second new release title is All the Beautiful Lies by author Peter Swanson. Now this author, he's the acclaimed author of Her Every Fear and The Kind Worth Killing, and he's written a clever tale of revenge, obsession, and cold-blooded murder. And it starts with at the college graduation, Harry Ackerman, who's the main character, finds out that his father is dead, and the police think that it's a suicide. So he's devastated. He has to leave, go back to Maine, where his father lived with his stepmother, and try to pick up the pieces of his life. But the longer he stays there, he realizes things aren't what they seem to be, and he feels that his stepmother is hiding a dangerous secret. This story is actually written with as a sly guessing game of a novel, told in the same vein that Ruth Ware, Paula Hawkins, and Patricia Highsmith write. And if you're not familiar with those suspense authors, it has very much of a Hitchcock feel to it. Our third new release title is The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer. She's the New York Times bestselling author of The Interestings. Now, when this author was coming up in her career as a writer, she had many mentors, including Nora Ephron, who took her under her wing and was showing her and guiding her through her career. So she kind of takes this it left quite an impression on her. So she takes this and she writes this in her novel, her new novel, and it becomes a story about power and ambition and influence, and it's really at its base, it's about the flame that we all believe is flickering inside of us and is just waiting to be seen by the right person at the right time. And she tells the story with a very quick-paced plot, and it illuminates both its characters and its social issues that are involved. So let's check that one out. Our fourth new release title is actually a nonfiction title called Natural Causes by Barbara Ehrenreich. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, she actually came out with her best-selling book, Nickel and Dimed, back probably in the late 1990s, probably 1999, something like that. It was when she was working on, she kept thinking about how millions of Americans were working at, working year-round for poverty-level wages, and she wondered how anyone survived, let alone prospered, at $6 an hour. So she decided to find out. She had sold her house, she moved into the cheapest lodging she could find, and she took up odd jobs such as a waitress or a cleaning lady or a Walmart clerk all across the country, from Maine to Florida to Minnesota. And then she wrote about her findings in Nickel and Dimed, and it became a bestseller. In her new book, the new book coming out in April, Natural Causes, Barbara Ehrenreich puts the same amount of research and dedication into finding out and exploring how we are killing ourselves while trying to live longer. She looks at how she writes about how we over-prepare and worry way too much about the inevitable. And she looks she topples the myths one by one that guide our attempts to live a long and healthy life. She writes about how we might buy expensive anti-aging products or get plastic surgery or get preventative screenings or jump into an extensive exercise regimen. But she writes that these things offer only an illusion of control. Her main point is how to live well or even joyously while accepting immortality is the vitally important philosophical point in this book. So she's both funny and caustic in her writing, and she tackles the seemingly unsolvable problem of how we might better prepare ourselves for the inevitable while still living the life we have left to live. So some good questions to think about. And our final new release title is Rocket Men by Robert Courson. Now this is a riveting story of the heroic tale of 3 men that were sent to the moon and the first moon expedition ever by the best-selling, New York Times best-selling author Robert Courson, who wrote Shadow Divers. The story starts, the book starts in 1968, where at this time NASA was, the American space program was in danger of failing its 2 major goals. Getting the man to the moon by the end of the decade, which is what President Kennedy had wanted, and the second one was to triumph over the Soviet space program. So with its back against the wall, NASA decided to scrap its methodical approach to the rocket launch and just do a sudden launch and get these guys out into the moon, out into space in 4 months by Christmas. I don't know why that was the deal, but they wanted to get them out there by Christmas. So. And you keep in mind that 1968 was also a very volatile year, very historical in its violence, with the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. We had the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy, the Democratic National Convention riots in Chicago. So with that background, the Apollo 8 mission would be the boldest, riskiest test of America's greatness under pressure. And in this gripping account, Robert Courson focuses on the 3 main characters, the astronauts, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders, and their families. And he draws from countless interviews, one-on-one interviews with NASA experts, family members, and goes through an incredible amount of records to bring an unforgettable detail to the story. It really is a real-life thriller. The author has a great way of writing about these types of things and making them, just as exciting as when they were happening. And he reveals the epic dangers in this book at this time that were inherent in the idea of sending a person to the moon that had never been done before. So he writes about it in great detail and excitement. So we'll have to check that one out as well. So those are our new releases coming out in April, and then some of our New York Times bestsellers. These are authors that many of you know. They have series that are out that you can't wait for the next book in the series to come out. So we have Kay Hooper is back with her Special Crimes Unit series with Hold Back the Dark. Lisa Scottoline is out with her next riveting domestic thriller, After Anna. Catherine Coulter is out with her Brit in the FBI series, The Sixth Day. And Ann Hillerman has Cave of Bones out. It's the latest in the Leaphorn, Chi, and Manuelito mystery series. And Alexander McCall Smith has a new one out. You guys might remember him for the #1 Ladies Detection Agency. He's out with his new book, The Good Pilot, Peter Woodhouse. He cannot have a small title. I don't know why. He always writes the longest titles. But David Baldacci is out with his next In the Memory Man called The Fallen. And Iris Johansson's out with Shattered Mirror. And Mary Higgins Clark, the Queen of Suspense, is out with I've Got My Eyes on You. So there you have it. That's our section on books. We talked about some new bestsellers coming up, some new releases in April. But now we get to visit with our special guest. Gareth, thank you so much for waiting so patiently.
Not a problem.
Yeah. You know, let's first talk about Nature and Arts Festival, because that is coming up in April. By the time this shows, you'll have a couple weeks to plan. You want to save that date, Saturday, April 28th.
Yep, 11 to 3.
11 to 3, save it. And, you know, we have been working on this for quite a while. And but, you know, how did this, tell everybody how this all got started.
Well, I think over the years, I've been feeling that Lake Catherine should be providing other services to the public. And there's a lot of different things that are out there in different countries where they actually will combine different ways of incorporating nature into your lives. And we think about the obvious things like when you go out as maybe you're bird walking or bird watching or walking. And those are pretty obvious to many people. But there are so many other ways of incorporating nature into your lives. And last year, obviously, we planted the nature and literature rather than nature and arts.
Yes, yes.
The idea that a lot of times reading is a gateway for people to interpret the landscape or the natural world. And this year we've kind of like added art because it seems to be a broader spectrum, so we can engage more people in different ways. And that's really stemmed, and it stemmed also from conversations that you and I have had over the years of like, how do we do this? And obviously incorporating having the Petals Heights Library help us with this seemed like a natural fit.
Right. There are so many other aspects of our community. You know, we do have a lot of art-related things going on, and that's kind of how we chose the feature presentations for this, right? The structure of this festival, we have 4 feature presentations, and then we have ongoing, hands-on activities that are going on, right? So at 11 o'clock, we start off with the Illinois, right?
Yeah, IPO, that's right.
Illinois Philharmonic Orchestra is going to be having a short program. 12 o'clock, we're going to be having a cooking demonstration, right?
Yeah, Christine Rosandish.
Chris Rosandish will be here, right? She's going to be taking wild edibles, right?
Yeah, we had a long conversation with her, and she seemed very amenable to the idea. She's obviously more of a nutritionist by training, but she seemed very excited about the idea.
Because I know you like the idea of...
Absolutely.
Because you do that, right? You
all the time. I go foraging myself. In fact, that was my breakfast. No, I mean, the idea of like going out into the natural world, and you can actually garner things from different times of the year. You know, where I grew up, we could get blackberries in September. Here, you can get Juneberries in June, and they're perfectly edible and actually very tasty. So the idea of incorporating those kind of things into normal cooking, it's also it connects you with a seasonality of the time of year, and that's something that we lose a lot of the times as well.
I was just going to say we do lose that. Just the other day I was out walking and I can actually smell the soil. Like it smelled like spring
after the rain.
Yeah, after the rain, and it's like, oh, I haven't had that scent in the air, and but it connects you back to like the earth again, because we're so used to going off and doing our own thing, and we forget about things.
Yeah, so I think it's more about an idea of paying attention to what's going on around you, and I think having a wild edibles, knowing that it's not just weird people in the woods doing this, that anyone can actually do this, and it's not too strange, and it's actually quite tasty. And I think that Christine is going to bring a nice element to that.
Yeah, and we'll actually have samples too, so you folks can actually sample the things that are found in nature, and you can, put that on your menu maybe. And then we have an award-winning designer. He's going to be here to show us how to incorporate natural elements into a design in a home. And then Mike McDonald, who was on the show last month, you folks remember him. He did the program about his book, My Journey.
Beautiful photography there as well.
Oh my God. Absolutely stunning. And so he's quite a character, and he'll do a multimedia presentation about his book. And but at the same time, like we mentioned, there are going to be other events going on. We'll be having our nature journaling.
Right.
We have a hands-on art project going on it's at the Clubhouse.
Yes, and so the point about that is we have the programmatic aspects of going throughout the day. So you can go over, enjoy a different program and learn something. But then we wanted to make sure that in the Clubhouse that people could have a hands-on approach and actually maybe learn something and actually incorporate that into their day. And maybe they do all of the activities, maybe they only do one. Maybe they do one and see just one program, but that's okay. The point is that we wanted to give things for people to engage, and that was important to us because we felt like I think last year we did literature, and from an activity standpoint, yes, you can have the writing and the poetry, but we wanted to expand on that so you could actually do some drawing. The nature journaling is observing of nature, and then how you incorporate that into your journals. But then there's the artistic elements that come too, and then we're also going to be dabbling with some music elements as well.
Right, and found art as well.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
So those are for all ages, okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Adults and kids. The kids we will be having a story time outside.
Winnie the Pooh?
Weather permitting.
Oh, I'll be fine.
Yeah, under the tree at the top of the waterfall.
It's very shaded up there. That's good.
Yes. Yeah, Winnie the Pooh, and then there's a storybook trail also for there. So you know, we have something for everyone. So really, come out and check it out. You're bound to learn something. And
it's free to the public.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Did we say that? Did we not say that?
I don't know, but
all right. Yes, it is free. So join us on that. You know, and we were talking about that. You know, tonight at the library, we're filming on March 28th. So we actually, you know, the library and Lake Catherine actually work together on many different projects. One of them is the Nature by the Book.
Right, yes.
Right, which is a program, ongoing program at the library with Lake Catherine. I mean, so there's a lot of things that we have going on.
And I think that was also the whole idea that literature is very important to people. And obviously with the Nature by the Book, we choose different literal forms, so that sometimes it's maybe more of a scientific book, sometimes it may be a very popular author that people
like Barbara Kingsolver
was hugely popular, but then also it might be things that are a bit more poetic. And
like we're doing Mary Oliver tonight.
Right.
Yeah, and I think also you know, I know you talked about wanting to do something like that because that's another way for people to connect to nature.
Absolutely.
Which is one of the things.
And I think it's probably some of my pet interests as well. I am interested in reading, and that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Speaking of books, yeah. So I know, you know, Garrett's been on the show 3 times because he's quite a reader, and he always has something to talk about. Every time we see each other, he's always telling me about a book he's read. Probably vice versa too. But what is the latest things that you've been reading?
Well, one of the things that I've recently read is called Rising Ground by a chap called Marsden, and that kind of resonated with me partly because it's set mostly in my home county of Cornwall in England, and he talks mostly about the sort of the ritualistic and spiritual place, and I thought this was quite an interesting book because he's someone that's moved to Cornwall. He didn't grow up there, but he moved there, and he does different.
Is he a Brit?
He is a British chap, and he walks through different parts of Cornwall, dependent on, and talks about those significant aspects of those places. So, for example, he's been to a place and talks about Tintagel, a place you've been to.
Yeah, right. Right. When I was visiting there with my daughter, she was researching the King Arthur legend, and it's one of the mythical places that...
So there was obviously a lot of mythology and story times based around that whole area, but also that was an important, I think, Iron Age fort, partly because it was a tin import-export location as well. So that place is a legitimate castle that's been in use and probably was very significant. But, you know, it now has more of a ritualistic significance to people, partly because of the mythology that's built up around there.
So I'm curious, like when you talk about, like, he went to Cornwall to look at the spirit of the place, how do people in England do they think of that, of Cornwall in particular, or is that anybody can go to any section of England, or does Cornwall have a specific reason for him feeling that way?
I think it does. Growing up there, I feel it does. I mean, I've lived in other parts of England, but mostly I grew up in Cornwall. And one of the things is you have the classic imagery of fishing landscapes. You have fishing villages, you have moorland, and then you have like these dramatic coastal sceneries. And then on top of that, so you've got the beauty of the landscape in itself, but then you also have the fact that that people have been there since prehistory. So you have a place called Lanyard Quoit is actually a former burial mound, and all that's left of it is the stones that are kind of cantilevered over each other, and it's these big granite things on a remote setting on a moorland. So people have been on this area, and you see the evidence of people being in this area since the Stone Age. And then obviously successive generations over that, you see this. So he talks about Bodmin Moor, which is a moorland that you kind of enter as you go into Cornwall, and that's full of ritualistic landscapes that humans have created since prehistory. And then, and so it kind of imparts the landscape a bit of a different feel. And he actually lives in Cornwall now. He lives in a place near where I actually used to grow up quite close. And but he talks about that. But he also talks about more modern history. There's Cornwall has a mining past from the 1800s. And so you find all these mine shafts nearby, and there's a lot of mining mythology as well. The Tommyknockers actually comes from a mythology of miners, and it's the dead of miners past, and you actually have to give like special things to them as you go
through. So like spirits, you mean? Yes,
basically, yeah. Okay. But that's where Tommyknocker comes from.
I didn't know what that word meant.
Oh yeah, yeah. But so he talks about different parts of Cornwall as he goes through the landscape, and I think Cornwall does have a bit more of that than say other parts, even though other parts really do.
It is an absolutely beautiful landscape. You know, I'm going to say that for those of you who've not been there, if you could visualize, isn't that show Poldark on PBS filmed in?
Yes, exclusively. Yeah.
So if you look at if you've seen the TV series Poldark, the landscape that's Cornwall. So you'll get an idea of how beautiful
But to get everywhere, you don't go across a cliff top on a horseback. You can actually use a car, and it's not always that.
Right,
so, yeah.
Right. That's why they have the other, I know when we were there, they were talking about some kind of, I don't know, legend of something on Bodmin Moor.
Well, it's the beast of Bodmin.
Yeah,
that's what
that's what our taxi driver was telling about when we were there. So I'm like, was this a real thing or?
There's a whole story about that, but I won't get into it.
We won't get. That's another show. Halloween, we'll talk about that.
Ooh.
So that's Rising Ground. Something else you had mentioned, like the Moth Snowstorm.
Well, you kind of lent that to me, actually. It was the Moth Snowstorm, because we were thinking about researching different books for Nature by the Book, and it's by a chap named McCarthy. And he basically, he incorporates a lot of his childhood, but it's not just the Moth Snowstorm is a phenomenon that people in the UK remember when they were younger, so maybe in the 50s. And it's basically when you're driving along a lane at night, and you basically have all the moths that kind of get illuminated within your lights. That doesn't happen any longer. Basically, there's been like a decimation of insects in the British countryside, and they don't really know why, especially as other countries have had similar pesticides used on their fields and those kind of things. So it's not just about that. He basically starts off talking about how nature is important to him, particularly butterflies when he was younger, when his family was going through a rough time in relation to his mother, and that's how he connected with dealing with those kind of things through his life. But then he goes into talking about what's happened to the landscape, what's happened, what environmental disasters have occurred around the world, and he talks about them in fairly scientific detail. Then he goes off and explains how that maybe, even though we have the facts of how the world is kind of going into demise, that's not necessarily the thing that's going to galvanize people to help protect it. The thing that does galvanize people is the fact that when people are in nature, they experience joy, wonder, all these other kind of things, and those lead on to empathy. And once you develop the empathy, then you can use the facts and figures to help people think. Then he ties it all back into how it's impacted his life and his family.
It's funny because the same themes are the themes that we talk about in Nature by the Book and that program that we were just talking about. So many of the books that we've discussed, those are the same themes, that people, like you said, he went through some dramatic event with his mother. His mother was hospitalized, and you know, so he turned to nature to. And
he didn't know if his mother was going to come back from that. She actually got sent off to a psych ward. Is basically what happened.
Geez. Okay, so it's a very serious thing, and so you know he turned to nature. So many of the other books we read and talked about in Nature by the Book, the same thing. You know, people they need nature to heal themselves, or they use it, and it becomes a healing factor in their lives.
And it's not so much that nature is kind of ambivalent whether we're there or not, but there's something about that we feel in a more natural state when we're in those areas, which calms down the other kind of stresses in our life. Right. And nature can kill us, absolutely. Yes. Yes. But there's something about we're more adapted to be able to deal with that. Think about it this way: we've been on the planet for 3 million years as modern day humans, and for the last maybe 2 centuries of that is really where we've been in a more industrialized state. Our bodies haven't adapted to those kind of modern stresses. We haven't adapted. So maybe going back to those environments is good for us from a mental state. And obviously it goes back to the other book we read the other while about the nature fix, how now science is actually updating ourselves on, yes, we know there's an impact, and this is how you can actually measure it now. So we've always known, I mean, like the great poets like Wordsworth, for example, they always talked about these environmental areas and how they impacted us. And now we can actually prove they have an impact, even though we knew they were having an impact.
Right. We talked about the book, The Nature Fix.
Yes. Yeah.
Nature Fix we talked about. That's another great a book of talking about nature's effect on us.
And it's still early days, the science of that, and I think now it's come to a point where we actually, yes, this is actually real.
Yeah, right. And then, did you have another? Time of Gifts was another book that we mentioned.
Yeah, it's more of a travel anthology, and a lot of people. It's Patrick Leigh Fillmore wrote this book. I think actually more in the 70s, but he actually experienced. When he was in his 18 or 19, just before the Second World War, maybe 2 years before the Second World War, he decided that he wanted to cross Europe from the Hook of Holland all the way to Constantinople at the time, or Istanbul, on foot. And he decided to do...
Just on a lark?
Pretty much, yeah.
Just go for a long walk. And
So he basically decided to do that. And in winter, of course, best time of year to kind of wander across. And so he would travel through Europe, exploring these different places, and sometimes he would be sleeping rough, and sometimes he would be staying in people's haylofts, and sometimes somehow he would be invited to different counts. I think he had a few connections, but they would be introduced to different people in different places. But what's interesting about it is he was traveling parts of Germany, and it was before, Nazism was on the rise there. But people were still kind of being friendly to him at that point because the war hadn't broken out. This was still quite a few more years. And he spent a good amount of time in Vienna and Austria as well, and he basically would do art drawings of people and sell them, and that's his way of making his life, getting through. So he met different characters, and so it's regarded as one of a classic travel writing. I wouldn't say it's kind of up there with Herodotus, but it's one of those kind of things that's regarded as a modern day 20th century, and the fact that it happened before the Second War has a lot of other interest into it.
Right. So he writes about his excursion or expedition from a much older point. He's an older man.
Right, and that was nice because he was able to take his journals from back in the day. He wrote a journal all along. He wanted to be a writer when he was younger, and so he thought he was going to write all these amazing things, and eventually he did, but much older, and so he was able to bring the knowledge that he had as an older man. He actually did a lot of things in the Second World War for the Allies. And then he was able to combine that with kind of the youthful exuberance of him when he was a young chap. So that was kind of nice to combine those things. This is a great book.
Okay, great. So we're going to have, so we'll have these are the books that we have posted on the screen behind us while we're talking. So they'll have the covers on that. Any other things you have going on, or?
Well, at Lake Catherine we have a lot of things going on, so we're very excited. Obviously we've got the Nature and Arts Festival coming up. This is coming into spring. Spring's our busiest time. It's the time of change at Lake Catherine where we start to get that dormancy period. So we're going to be planting a lot of trees, a lot of bushes. We have a lot of events coming up in April and May. We have...
Are they on your website?
They're all on our website as well.
Which is?
lakecatherine.org.
Okay.
I remember that. Okay. So no, we're quite excited about what we have. This is an exciting time of year for us, and it's very, very busy. A lot of weekend events. We have a Break for the Lake. We have a River Cleanup Day, and so it's a fun time.
Is that something everybody can participate in, or is it volunteers, or?
So our Break for the Lake is a trail race, and people can sign up for that online. We also the River Cleanup Day is done through the Chicago River, and they pick different sites around the county, and you can choose wherever you would go to, but you have to sign up through them.
Okay.
But we're a site for them, and you usually get about 50 volunteers every time for that.
Wow.
We have a native plant sale going on that same day as well. So like
that's in April?
That's in May. Okay. And so we have the native plants sale is basically all the native plants that we're going to try and sell to the public, and these are also some of the same plants that we've been using as for pollinators. So, like in keeping with the Mayor's Monarch Pledge that we kind of been in keep, and obviously the library's been doing.
Right.
We're actually going to be planting your pollinator garden as well in May.
Yeah, we can't wait.
So we're excited about doing that stuff. So a lot of kind of good activities. It's a planting season. It's getting good plants in the ground. And
busy time of year.
Yeah,
you.
but it's fun.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time to be with us,
You're welcome.
even though it is your busy time of year. Mm-hmm. We are excited about having the Nature and Arts Festival coming up. Gareth, thanks again for being with us. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.